Hi guys, Jerkin Reviews here, and I'm back with another Series 11 review. This time we are going for Episode 3, Rosa by Marilee Blackman and Chris Chibnall, the showrunner himself. Now, we're going to get right into this. The build-up to this story, I think, was unnerving, I think, for every fan because of the way that Doctor Who has handled historicals in the past, and Thin Ice, and with that similar subject was an absolute travesty of an episode, and I think that's left a bad taste in the mouths of fans, because I was said to people that Rosa, this episode, had no excuse other than to be good or great. If it wasn't either of those things, this episode, it would have flopped, because it's the hardest and most sensitive subject I think Doctor Who has ever tackled in its 55-year history. It's actually quite amazing how they managed to pull it off tonight. And this episode, I think I can completely and surely say, it wasn't good, it was great. This was a fantastic piece of television, not just Doctor Who, television. Because I think even if this episode was good, I don't think it would have satisfied the hunger of fans, and especially with this topic. Instead, it was absolutely fantastic. Rosa Parks was played fantastically by Vworp Robinson. I believe I'm saying that right. Vworp, I think, was wonderful. You rarely got that sense that she was just a bit unnerved by the whole situation of the Doctor and the gang just bursting through kind of into her life, and she's rarely the first person this episode focuses on. Right at the beginning, when it sets the setting 12 years before 1955, and just establishing the whole bus situation and getting us familiar with that environment, which, by the way, I think is a really smart piece of storytelling there. The fact that we keep going to this bus, and it really does hammer home this is the end game, this is the goal of the story. This opened up so terrifically, because I was like, holy shit, Doctor Who's got a budget. This was, I think, is going to be the high budget episode of the series. Just the way they perfectly recreated Alabama 1955, and it made you immerse yourself in this environment, because Thin Ice, sometimes it was very obvious some parts of that was in a studio. I don't think Doctor Who's ever had a convincing past piece like this since The Empty Child and the Doctor Dancers, when that beautifully recreated World War II during the Blitz. And I think this has to go up there, and it maybe even tops that environment, that really lovely, intimate environment that that story created. And I think that it was even replicated here, just to create this environment of Alabama. Because sometimes in Doctor Who, you think they're trying too hard for an environment. The biggest one, a town called Mercy. I don't believe for a second that we're actually in the Wild West. I believe we're in a very cheap episode of Doctor Who trying to be cool. So with this, it was like they actually just put so much thought and time into it, and I believe this set was one of the first ones leaked, I think, for the series, and that got a lot of speculation going, and now we know what it was. The way that it starts off with a happy 1950s music just added to that environment, and I think what was wonderful, and I noticed this just flicking back through just before this review, that the music stops, the happy music stops the moment that Rosa Parks gets on the bus, and then it starts to get immediate tension, I feel, and it even establishes the bus driver as well. The episode, what absolutely struck me was how dangerous history is, because I think Doctor Who has such a habit of going to somewhere, like whether an alien planet or the past, wherever, and then going, oh, it's very dangerous here, we must tread carefully, and it's just not. it just doesn't feel dangerous at all. While this, it was established right from the beginning when Ryan goes to give the woman back her glove and he just gets slapped in the face instantly. I think everyone in my room just went, holy shit. That is one of the most striking images Doctor Who's had for the new series. That was powerful. And the language used as well. I jotted some of the quotes down. Swinging from a tree and actually using the word noose in that dialogue. In my group of people, I went, is this Doctor Who? And that's a good thing, by the way. I'm not saying that, oh, it's not like Doctor Who. This was Doctor Who, but it was a new style of Doctor Who. It was serious and gritty Doctor Who. And I think that was a excellent way in terms of storytelling to start off the episode. Doctor Who, in terms of its historicals, I think have maybe tried to be a bit too fun. While with this, Deema Looming said this episode wasn't fun at all, and perfectly agree with that statement. It wasn't fun. It was, you felt completely unnerved. You felt like you were immersed in that environment with the characters, and you feel that your stomach churning with that tension everywhere they go, and that put a lot of baggage on Ryan himself. He was brushing it off, but deep down you could, with the fantastic acting, you could tell that he was completely unnerved and his stomach was churning, as the viewers was during those scenes. Excellent storytelling by Marilee Blackman and Chris Chibnall. I think I can really see who wrote what bits. My estimate is Marilee Blackman wrote pretty much most of the script, and Chris Chibnall done like the little intimate character moments, like where Yaz and Ryan are talking just about their views on racism and what they think and go through. That was very much, I feel, Chris Chibnall's style of writing. So I think Marilee Blackman and Chris Chibnall really worked perfectly as a team in synchronization, and I think that's really the only bit I can kind of like tell. Maybe the mentions of Grace as well was a bit of Chibbers, but other than that, I thought it was absolutely seamless. In fact, that's quite a fitting word, I think, this episode. It was just, I just can't think of any flaws for this episode, I will be completely honest. There was a use of, I would say strong language, but it was more aggressive language, especially what Yaz uses as well, in terms of what she's described as. And I've noticed that, because I grew up with CBBC, and there was a definite push, I think, around the time of Tracy Beaker Returns. I vividly remember they would go through themes like this and actually use the language that is used, which, so I was quite familiar with it, and it always is quite hard-hitting as well. Especially with Doctor Who, it's like, oh, it's very innocent, it's silly Doctor Who. This episode had balls, so much balls, to just, it really pushed the boundaries of what it could say, and especially with how the characters are treated as well. You've really felt for Ryan in the fact that whenever Ryan goes off on his own, you're like, oh my god, don't, you're like, just please stick with the Doctor, and even the Doctor's completely concerned. She's just, go back to the TARDIS, be safe, but Yaz and Ryan, they stick, and they're just like, no, we're gonna stay here, because you need us. And that's incredible how tight this team is already. As a little sidetrack, the recent DWM comic, The Warmongerer, I think is a perfect, I'd say a perfect vivid into the future of what a final form of this team is going to look like. I just love this TARDIS team. They are completely in sync with each other. They're wonderful. Yaz got a lot to do in this story. In Rosa, back to Rosa now. She took this almost kind of protector role, his kind of motherly role, even though she was still a bit unsure. And in the Warmonger, she does take up a bit more of a motherly role as well, so that might be her role in the team, that she's more of the protector, the Doctor's the intelligent one, Ryan is the smart one, and Graham is a mix of that as well. I think that mix is really what makes Graham such a strong part of this team as well. I thought the direction of this episode, superb. That opening with the continuous shot that follows the car and you go into the alleyway, and then the TARDIS appears, that was impressive. I really loved that. I've been watching Daredevil recently on Netflix, and they've done that incredible 11-minute one-take sequence, which is gorgeous. So I've really been on the lookout for direction with that series, and I can really see like the influence of again, like those one takes with Daredevil that pushed the boundaries of television with its season 1. I think that this series has took inspiration with that as well, because that continuous shot was gorgeous, and the way the TARDIS appears, that big bulky base on the bottom of it, so TV movie. Absolutely adore that base. This TARDIS exterior really becoming one of my complete and utter favourites of the new series, in terms of TARDIS exteriors. Beautiful, gorgeous, and even the way that the windows, they sort of materialised first. It's just that light, the beacon of hope that TARDIS is. Absolutely beautiful. And I did quite like how the TARDIS wasn't really included that much in this episode. It was just there at the beginning and at the end. That was it. So it really did once again immerse you in this world and made you feel like, it made you feel like it was being broken, say if they were going constantly back and forth, or if Ryan and Yaz stayed in there, as that would have took a lot away from their character moments in the story. Rosa Parks, I thought, was handled perfectly. I don't think I've saw any complaints. Everybody is stunned by this. Currently, after that episode aired, the top 2 trends were, and I think still are, hashtag Doctor Who and hashtag Rosa Parks. And I think that really just shows how much of an impact that this episode has had on the viewer, the general audience, the public, that they are wanting to talk about Doctor Who. Because I don't think Doctor Who got the #1 trend last week. So it's still at a strong place with about 37,000 tweets talking about it. I'm going to be really intrigued by the viewing figures. I maybe predict they might be lower. I predict it'll have a lower overnight than last week's, just naturally. And I think last week's did put a few people off. But this episode's getting so much traction online. There's so many articles about it. I think every news source is doing an article about this episode. I think that iPlayer is going to be more than last week, because I think this is going to be an event television thing to watch. This is going to be something people will talk about during like work, college, school, university, wherever you are. You're going to talk about it, and even with your family. I know a lot more of my family are watching Doctor Who now, just in their spare time, not because they have to, because I force them to. Because it just shows the increase in quality of this series, and genuinely, if this series continues like this, maybe one of the best Doctor Who series ever. I think, which is a strong statement by episode 3, but I've not been disappointed with the episode yet. And I think this episode, by far, is the best of Series 11. It was reminded me so much of Hartnell. And Jodie, once again, blew the doors down. Jodie really took that Hartnell role, especially at the end, when Graham is like, I don't want to be a part of this. That's very strong, and Jodie's like, we have to be. And it was done respectfully, it was done tastefully, and it was done in a way that allowed the viewer to become more intimate with that scene. The fact that we were viewing it basically from the eyes of those characters, that they were kind of in awe of this situation. And the music, I think, really helped as well. Because Doctor Who has not used pop music since series 5 in Vincent and the Doctor, and that really drove home that emotion in that scene, and I think this worked perfectly fantastic as well. Some people I've saw on Twitter are a little bit iffy about it. I don't like it was I don't like it was used to replace the end credits, because we'd had the break from the music and that scene in the TARDIS, and then it returned, and it was a bit like, oh. I would have preferred the theme, but it did work rather well with the next time trailer, I do feel, as well. So that was a plus side. The music was, I think, perfect for the scene, because I think it really drove home that emotion, and made the scene more memorable and powerful as well. Say if this song comes on the radio, I think people are going to think of Doctor Who. And I think that's really what you want. I'm sure whatever the song is, the comments right now are going to be flooded with, who watched Doctor Who tonight? This was on Doctor Who. Very nice that they're very modern now, with just how they use the music. Glorious was fantastic. I really loved its use of that, and I think this was fantastic use as well. So hopefully, I do think they continue the modern style. I don't think they should really do the pop music and Doctor Who all the time, because I think you're going to really diminish the scenes. But let's just say it was just a fantastic use here, and I'm sure if they ever want to use pop music again, they will find a use for it. There was, for such a dark episode, with a segue here, there was quite a bit of comedy in this. I think one of the funniest jokes was the Banksy joke. My entire room erupted with laughter. It was so well delivered. One of the funniest lines Doctor Who's had in ages. That was wonderfully beautiful. Who do you think you are, Banksy? Maybe I am. And then she continues it again, or am I, when she opens the door. That was fantastic. Fantastically delivered between Bradley Walsh and Jodie Whittaker. They have such fantastic chemistry. And when Graham has to pretend that the Doctor's his wife, or the Doctor has to pretend, I think she instigates that Graham's her husband first. That was wonderfully done as well. Such high tension in that scene as well. The humour kind of, it was like nervous humour. I really liked that. When the tension, when the police officer slowly opens the door, and Raz and Ryan not there because they're smart, they knew where to hide. Again, there was that brilliant Steve Jobs joke as well. That was fantastically delivered as well. Hopefully that will age well. Let's say in like 25 years, when maybe a couple of generations will never even heard of Steve Jobs. But I thought that was those two jokes were excellent. There was the scene where Ryan meets Martin Luther King, and in that sort of group. I thought that was a really good scene as well. It was a little bit heartwarming when he talks about his nan, Grace. It's so emotional when this series talks about Grace, I really feel. Definitely, I can see Chibnall was the one who wrote those little bits. Because it's like her memories living on in a way, and it's not mentioned when it's convenient or out of place. It's so natural. And that bit where Grace says, when Graham says, "I wish she was here," and you rarely see Bradley welling up. Powerful acting by that man. He is tremendous, brilliant singer, actor, entertainer. Bradley Walsh has it all. That was beautifully done, and it's shown that Grace's life lessons had gone on to Ryan, and the fact says, well, I hope not, she would have caused a riot. That's wonderful, and that's this character development. He's moving a bit further away off on the grief, and he's really implementing Grace's lessons into his way of life as well, especially when it's like, my nan told me to keep my temper. Wonderfully written, wonderfully acted. I really am loving Ryan in the series. I'm loving Yaz, I'm loving Graham, everyone's wonderful. Yaz, again, as mentioned before, got a lot of stuff to do in this episode as well. She was quite fun whenever she'd be quite stern. I think next week's going to be quite a Yaz-centred episode because her mum is in it, so I believe that's what I gathered from the next time trailer, so that's going to be really cool. I'm super looking forward to next week. The villain Krasko, well, he sounded like Costco to me, but it was Krasko with a K. I have to look on IMDb. He was okay. I thought he was good for the purpose of the story because the story was about Rosa Parks. It wasn't about him. And in fact, I thought he complemented the story. I didn't have any problems with him. Maybe he was disposed a little bit too easily, but he wasn't the focus. He was this fantastic threat for Jodie to just mouth off with, and it's really cool that the Doctor has somebody to kind of like have technobabble arguments with. I think pretty much for the first time. With Tim Shaw, it was more of a battle of morals, and I am the Doctor and getting to know her personality in last week's. She didn't really have the opportunity to mouth off with the big bad of the episode, so it was really cool for the character development here. And I think that scene where Krasko actually chokes the Doctor, that is going to put an end to a lot of people's argument of that Jodie Whittaker is treated with special how do you say, treated with a special honour above the Doctors, because that was a very powerful image. We remember the whole X-Men Apocalypse debacle of when that poster of Apocalypse choking Mystique. That was quite, so this was quite a strong image as well. So you can see that they're not pulling any punches. Jodie Whittaker's getting treated the exact same as the rest of the Doctors, and that's what the Doctor should be. The Doctor will get their ass kicked if it's to prove that they are right, and I felt she put that together perfectly in this episode. So with the villain, I don't have any problems with him. Did Ryan kill him technically? I think this series does maybe have a bit of a habit of defeating an enemy and then kind of never talking about them again. So it will be interesting maybe if he returns, because I thought it was a very open-ended return for Krasko, because he's sent back in time. But who knows, we might have a Pandora-esque thing with like the Stenzar and spiders from next week and Krasko, who knows. But yeah, I thought he was fantastically acted by his actor. I couldn't really tell his accent. It was kind of a bit of English with a bit of Scottish, I kind of thought. Especially because he was so used to like the deep southern accent of the Americans. But again, I thought he really complemented the story well. I loved the way that he was one step ahead of the gang. That was an excellent use to implement a sci-fi threat into what could have been a pure historical. I felt maybe this was the way Doctor Who should have done it, because it had such a sense of nervousness, especially when the bus wasn't filled up properly. It was like, oh my god, in his defeat, did he win? So much tension in the story all the way through, like the setting perfect, so unnerving. You felt like, oh god, do not touch any of my favourite characters, please, like, don't, otherwise I'm going to jump through that screen. That is the feeling that you want, and by episode 3 we have such a strong connection with these characters. Wonderful. I think that's fantastic. There was that little bit at the end where the gang is kind of looking at the TARDIS, that scanner hologram. By the way, I hate that. I hate that it's not like a screen. I really like a screen. And the TARDIS is okay. It's growing on me a little bit, the way that it's actually being used more as a proper TARDIS and not that goofy thing last week with the mini TARDIS and the Sandtown, which I thought the Sandtown was ridiculous. So it's getting okay, and they're learning to shoot it a bit better, as the way that giant ass column wasn't disrupting the view of the console this week. That bit was, but that whole scene to what happened to us after, little bit CBBC-ish, Sarah Jane Adventure-ish, but I think in order for kids to be educated, it's fine. It didn't disrupt the episode for me. By the way, the asteroid 284996, the Rosa Parks, it's real. Because I think Stephen Moffat had this bit of a habit of or I think any New Who, really, with RTD and like the SS Man and Pompadour. It's like, oh yes, this historical figure had this thing named after him in the future, which I think got a little bit bullshitty. But no, it is actually a real thing, so I think that really had this more educational aspect to it, which I really appreciated. Again, Jodie taking up this kind of like Hartnell-esque role, especially reminds me a bit of The Massacre, at the end, where you hear like all the people kind of being slaughtered, and I believe that the Doctor kind of explains what happened after in the aftermath of the massacre as well. So it's obviously, like, thematically they're completely different things, but I just mean in the fact that the show is almost, it's been the educator, isn't it? The Massacre, my personal favourite historical Doctor Who's ever done. A beautiful episode with Stephen, and that I thought they kind of reflected each other a little bit, because when Stephen's like a bit with the Doctor at the end of that, you know, like, can we save anyone? The Doctor's like, no, we must let history play out its course. Very much like with when Jodie's like, yeah, we need to be a part of history here, or because we need to fulfill the destiny, really, in order for the future. And of course, Graham, once again, torn up about that. The tension is what I'm trying to say. The tension of those is what makes it. Is what makes them reflect each other. So, again, wonderful. It's one thing that's actually quite hitting about this episode. Doctor Who only started 8 years after this episode was set, when Rosa Parks stood up on the bus. That's no time at all. So it really does show how kind of within Doctor Who history that was, and the show's developed at the point it is a part of history, and that it is talked upon with this nuance and style. Again, event television, BBC iPlayer, I think, is going to have such an increase with viewers, more than last week's, because people are going to talk about how fantastic this episode was. In terms of ratings, do you know what? My first viewing, 9 out of 10. Because I'm not going to say 10, for the sole reason I may change my opinion. Like, with a few issues that may arise, maybe on a rewatch I may find a pacing issue or something like that. I am going to revisit series 11 part 1 come episode 5 with Poet Smith 11 and Night Thoughts, so that'll be kind of more altered views, I kind of think, and altered ratings. But I think a 9 out of 10, absolutely perfect for this episode. It's really what Doctor Who needed, and yeah, everyone seems to be pleased with it. I think some people just didn't really know what to think, because it's just that different, isn't it, from what we've saw previously with historicals. I would really love to see more historicals done like this, because historicals for me have to be engaging, and this was completely engaging. The threat, the setting, the characters, yeah, I just thought it was great. So I think I've praised this episode enough. I didn't have much issues with it. Again, next week is Arachnids in the UK, a title I love. I think that's a really fun little play on words with Anarchy in the UK by the Sex Pistols. So I wonder if that episode may have a bit of a punk rocky soundtrack to it. I'm quite intrigued there. Oh, by the way, I just want to say this episode definitely had the best music of Series 11 so far. It just complemented every scene perfectly by Seika Akinola. And yeah, complimentary, I really think, is a way to describe this episode. Everything complemented each other perfectly. So yeah, Arachnids in the UK is next week, and I will hopefully see you again next Sunday, maybe Monday. I can never really promise, but I do try and get these out as soon as possible, just because I really am passionate about Doctor Who, especially now it's on telly again. I just recently done Big Finish fans on Poet Smith 11's channel, talking about Ravenous 2 and upcoming releases and all new Big Finish jazz, and I was very passionate in there, just talking about like the Vworp robots and everything. So I'm just really loving talking about Doctor Who currently, so please go check that out. Also Whovian High Council, which is going to be on Purpose 11's channel again. Please give that a watch. We'll talk about Rosa as a group. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed, hope you had a lovely night, and I hope that you have a good week as well. I will see you next Sunday, Monday, and yeah, goodbye.